Think about exactly what you did this morning. You woke up and you probably ate breakfast. Later today, you're gonna grab lunch. And tonight, you'll sit down for dinner. You didn't even question it, right? I mean, it just feels like the natural order of things. But here's a massive secret that almost nobody talks about. No one, and I mean no one, decided the schedule based on your actual human biology. So let's dive into this explainer and completely shatter the illusion behind your daily routine.
Seriously, who actually mapped out this exact schedule for us? Was it some genius medical doctor who perfectly analyzed human metabolism centuries ago? Or maybe some ancient, enlightened wisdom handed down to us as the absolute best way to fuel our bodies? Well, the answer is a resounding no. No doctor prescribed this, and no ancient scroll mandated it. Your everyday eating schedule? It's completely made up. It's an invention.
So, the absolute crucial takeaway right off the bat is this. 3 meals a day is not some unbreakable law of nature. It's just a story. And honestly, it's one of the most fascinating, beautifully constructed stories in all of human history. Our strict little eating routine is actually just a wild patchwork of cultural accidents, industrial demands, and, well, aggressive marketing. To really understand why you're eating dinner tonight, we've got to travel back in time to see exactly how this story got written.
Let's jump way back, like 23,000 years ago, to the shores of the Sea of Galilee. There we find the Ohalo 2 hunter-gatherers. And you know when they ate? Literally, just whenever food was available. Not 3 times a day, not twice, just whenever they pulled off a successful hunt or had a lucky morning foraging. Eating wasn't a routine at all. It was a result. And you know, even when agriculture came along around 10,000 BCE and finally stabilized our food supply, giving us permanent settlements and communal cooking, that 3-meal structure still didn't exist. People just ate based on their local culture, their geography, and honestly, how much daylight they had.
This really highlights the sheer chaotic variety of the ancient world. Like if you lived in ancient Egypt, you typically eat just 2 meals. A super light morning meal, usually just bread and beer, and then a heavier meal in the evening. The ancient Greeks, they were a bit more flexible. They often had 3 gatherings, like a light bread and wine dip in the morning, something midday, and a big evening get-together. But listen, these were absolutely not fixed, time-locked events. And then we have the Romans. The Roman Empire, literally one of the most highly organized civilizations in human history, lived on a strict, rigid 1-meal model.
Historian Caroline Yeldham actually points out that the Romans were deeply suspicious of eating more than once a day. I mean, they were absolutely obsessed with digestion. To an ancient Roman, eating multiple meals wasn't some flex of wealth or a sign of good health. No way. They viewed it as a literal form of gluttony. They ate one primary meal called cena right around midday, and crazy enough, this single-meal mindset totally dominated a huge chunk of Europe for centuries.
All right, fast forward to the moment European settlers arrived in the Americas, and boom, we see this massive cultural clash. Native Americans had these beautifully adaptive eating habits. They fasted when it made sense, they shifted their intake based on the seasons, and they followed absolutely zero rigid daily schedules. But those European settlers arriving on their shores, they brought with them this intense, growing obsession with super rigid, scheduled eating.
Historian Abigail Carroll, who wrote a great book called 3 Squares, points out that European settlers watched indigenous people eat in ways that seemed completely chaotic to them. Get this, they actually called it uncivilized. It's wild to think about, right? This European cultural bias, the flat-out assumption that eating on a strict schedule somehow equaled civilization, would eventually become the driving force that forcefully spread the structured meal model across the entire globe.
Section 1. Ships, clocks, and factories. The industrial catalyst. So how exactly did scheduled eating morph specifically into 3 meals? Well, we've got to look at the exact moment society stopped organizing itself around the sun and started organizing around the ticking clock. Back in the 16th century, the British Royal Navy became one of the very first massive institutions to formalize 3 meals a day. They served their sailors a simple breakfast, a midday lunch, and a lighter dinner. And the reasoning? Purely practical. These guys were doing relentless, backbreaking physical labor and just needed fuel at totally predictable intervals. This naval structure ended up perfectly paving the way for the 1760 Industrial Revolution, which absolutely demanded strict factory hours and completely changed how humanity related to time.
Just think about the factory routine for a second. Before this, people were working out in the fields with these loose, easy, seasonal rhythms. Then, suddenly, millions of people are crammed into factories with incredibly rigid, standardized hours. You clock in at a fixed time. You get exactly 1 break in the middle of the day. So what happens? Well, you eat breakfast before your shift,
You eat lunch during that one midday break, and you eat dinner after your shift is finally over. The rigid breakfast, lunch, and dinner routine wasn't some grand biological discovery. It was quite literally just an organizational solution to help people survive factory life.
And this shows just how wildly societal values can flip overnight. Check this out. In medieval Christian Europe, eating before morning mass was heavily discouraged. Breakfast was practically seen as a spiritual failure. But once the Industrial Revolution hit, skipping a morning meal before working a grueling 10 or 12-hour factory shift wasn't some noble spiritual discipline anymore. It was a literal health hazard. People physically needed that morning fuel just to survive the heavy machinery.
And you know, it also completely flipped when we ate our biggest meal. Before industrialization, the main meal was always eaten right at midday, when natural sunlight was at its absolute strongest. But thanks to the invention of artificial lighting, factory bosses could keep workers busy well into the late afternoon and evening. Because of that shift, the main meal basically migrated to the end of the day. By the mid-1800s, this heavy, end-of-day dinner had officially become the daily anchor for the working class.
Section 2. The Business of Breakfast, Cereal and Commerce.
So industry built the framework, right? But it took commerce to really cement it into our brains permanently. Enter John Harvey Kellogg. He's this cereal entrepreneur who famously invented cornflakes as a health food. In the early 20th century, specifically around the 1920s and 30s, Kellogg unleashed these incredibly aggressive marketing campaigns. He is literally the guy who cemented the idea that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And spoiler alert, that wasn't driven by pure science, it was pure commerce. Cereal companies needed people buying and eating their product every single morning. They basically took a logistical factory habit and marketed it into an absolute daily requirement. And honestly, it worked perfectly.
Section 3. Biology and the Circadian Clock, the Scientific Twist.
Okay, so we've seen the history, we've seen the commerce, but what about the actual science? After all this talk about ancient Romans, Navy sailors, sweaty factories, and cereal ads, does your body actually even want you to eat 3 times a day? Like, how does our modern biology react to a schedule that was completely made up? Well, research published in Current Biology reveals something absolutely incredible about our internal clocks.
Inside every single one of us is a circadian rhythm. It's essentially a 24-hour internal clock. And this clock, it dictates everything. It affects your blood glucose, your insulin sensitivity, your metabolism. It even dictates how your fat cells behave at a cellular level. In the morning, your cortisol naturally rises. Because of this spike, your body becomes remarkably efficient at processing food. Your insulin sensitivity is pretty much at its peak, meaning carbohydrates and sugars are rapidly converted into usable energy rather than just being stored as fat. The contrast here is super dramatic. Think about it. If you eat a big meal in the morning, your body uses that high insulin sensitivity to create really efficient energy. But if you take that exact same meal and eat it late at night, the biological outcome changes completely. Your blood sugar spikes way higher, your sleep quality plummets, and fat storage increases. Your body literally processes the exact same plate of food entirely differently depending purely on the time of day you eat it. But wait, it gets better. Your biology isn't just passively sitting there. Your hunger hormones, specifically ghrelin and leptin, actually learn the culturally invented habits that we forced onto them. Scientists call this physiological food anticipation. Basically, your body predicts your daily routines and adjusts itself on the fly. It literally starts preparing your digestive system for a meal before you even take your very first bite just because it knows what time it says on the clock. That is wild.
So here's the crucial biological takeaway. What matters most to your body is actually not the exact number of meals you eat. 2 meals, 3 meals, or even 4 can all work perfectly fine. What really matters is consuming the bulk of your food during daylight hours, when your body is naturally, metabolically prepared to process it. Our bodies just happen to align really well with a daytime eating schedule, totally regardless of how many distinct times we sit down to chew our food.
Section 4. More than just fuel, the social anchor.
To really fully grasp our eating schedule, we've got to look past just metabolism and talk about the social anchor. Because eating is, and honestly always has been, way more than just fuel. For 23,000 years, long before the first factory blew its morning whistle or the very first cereal ad was printed in a magazine, humans have been gathering around food. Shared meals were absolutely crucial for building trust, strengthening relationships, and signaling safety within a tribe. Even today, social psychology consistently finds that people who eat regularly with others report way greater happiness and a much deeper sense of belonging.
Let's recap this whole wild historical journey. The true recipe for our 3 meals a day is basically a chaotic giant puzzle. It took 16th century naval schedules to formalize it. It took the Industrial Revolution's brutal factory breaks to demand it. It took a massive shift in religious views just to allow it. It took 20th century commerce to aggressively market it. And underneath that whole shebang, it took a biological circadian rhythm that just so happened to naturally align with daylight digestion. It's an incredibly fascinating blend of industry, commerce, and human physiology, all shaping one another over centuries.
Which brings us to the end of this explainer. Tonight, you're going to sit down for dinner just like billions of people before you. But you know now, it's not because a doctor told you to. And it sure isn't because it's some strict law of nature. It's because you are actively participating in a 23,000-year-old human tradition perfectly modified by naval